We live in a time where masculinity is shamed and men don't know what it means to be a man. As a pastor and counselor, I've spent the better part of my life equipping and training others. My goal with this show is to translate my hard-earned experience into tools and tactics to help you become stronger as a man. This is the BraveCo podcast. I'm your host, Jason Valentin. Welcome back to the BraveCo podcast, BraveCo men. I am excited to be here with a good friend of mine, Sathiya. Sathiya, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me, Jay. You've been crushing it with my audience. They've been loving you, and I'm excited to be back on here.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have such similar passions and hearts, and so it's been really cool to jump over to your world a little bit and hang out with the men that you're leading. And I'm really excited for this podcast today. It's funny. We both went, "Hey, am I on your podcast or are you on my podcast today?" Because anyways, we had a funny hiccup, but it's really cool to have other guys like you who are pushing the envelope forward and helping guys get well. And that's what you do. You have a coaching business called DeepClean, and we'll dive into that a bit. And you have a podcast called Unleash the Man podcast, but you really are fully focused on getting men well, helping guys heal from pornography. And we're going to dive into that quite a bit today. You were a pastor for a lot of years. How long were you a pastor for?
Technically about 10 years of local church leadership. Kind of started part-time and eventually became full-time, but yeah, full decade of my life.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. God bless those pastors out there, you know?
Oh, seriously, man. Seriously. I'm actually fourth gen. So grew up as a pastor's kid, and grandpa and great grandpa were pastors too. So couldn't escape it even if I wanted to.
Dude, that's rad. Yeah. I mean, I've been a pastor this year will be 20 years, going on 20 years, and second generation, not first or fourth. But yeah, man, it's a lot of work and so rewarding, but it's really cool. I really want to spend most of our time talking about pornography and how to get free from pornography and the whole conversation around that. Because I think that's where you spend a lot of your time. And I know that you don't just do that, helping men grow. But first, before we do that, maybe just for a few minutes, how did that become your passion? And what's your story, behind working through pornography yourself? I'm assuming that is part of your story. And then how did you get into helping guys?
Yeah, so like I said, I grew up very Christian, pastor's home, and went to Christian school, all that kind of stuff. My first exposure to pornography was in the computer lab of my Christian school. And that was before broadband internet, smartphones, all that stuff. So
how old are you?
I was 11 years old. That was 2001. To put some context in that.
Yeah.
So it was online, but it was like really hard to access, and you had like people came up with all these clever URLs that didn't sound like a porn site. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, it's kind of disturbing. So that's how I got exposed. I wasn't like instantly addicted. I actually hadn't hit puberty yet. I was 11 years old. So yeah, I was kind of disturbed almost by what I saw, but intrigued, equally intrigued. Mm-hmm. And then when I did hit puberty, I remembered everything about that experience. It was so formative for me. And so I went back and I started browsing regularly. By the time I was in high school, you're watching pretty normally. And then in university, that's where I would say this was like a proper addiction, because I was planning my days around it. I was looking forward to it. It was kind of how I rewarded myself for, I was very studious and academic. So that was sort of how I took the edge off. And I started kind of, not participating in commitments the same way, engaging in riskier behavior to view pornography. And that was sort of the pinnacle of it. And I always told myself I could quit, classic addict language, like it's not that bad. It's not as bad as so-and-so. I can stop when I want. And I was studying the sciences in university. My intention was to become a doctor. And in that season of my life is where I actually committed myself to Jesus. Like I said, I grew up in the church. I was still involved, but obviously at some point you have to make that decision yourself. And being in a very atheistic, intelligent, academic environment is where I really found God. And that's another story probably for another day. But I knew that when I committed myself to Jesus, I had to make some lifestyle changes. So I had to, start drinking responsibly or stop drinking altogether. I had to clean up my language and I had to quit porn. Those are like the three things that were top of mind. And the first two were no problem. It was, that was almost overnight. But I could not for the life of me quit porn.
Yeah.
And that was when I was confronted with my reality. And unfortunately, it took me another 5 years. I don't think it should have taken that long for me to actually quit, but I was so under resourced. I was so, just unknowledgeable about the subject and had no idea how to get free. Everybody just said, you slap on an internet filter, see if you can get an internet
Yeah.
or an accountability partner, try to
Yeah.
pray about it more, ramp up the spiritual disciplines. Like it was
Yeah.
all good stuff, but there was no sense of getting to the more root issues or the causal elements. And that took me about another 3 years to discover. And once I figured those things out, then we were off to the races. It was just kind of a matter of time. And so February 2016, I had my last relapse, and I had two prayers during that kind of 5 year recovery period.
Mm.
The first was, God, whoever my future spouse is, keep her from me until I get this figured out. Pretty bold prayer.
That's a good
And
prayer, dude. That's a smart
not bad
prayer.
though. Yeah, yeah. In hindsight, I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah.
Second prayer was, God, if you set me free or if you help me figure out how to get free, I will help other guys get free as well.
Mm.
And so that seed was always planted there. So I had my last relapse February 2016. I met Shaloma, who's now my wife, November 2016. So about 9 months later. So God really
Wow.
honored that prayer. And then I launched DeepClean December 2018. I waited a couple years. I had longer stints previously and then I relapsed. And so I really wanted to make sure I heard from the Lord and that I just kind of felt peace about it and that I was truly free. And so December 2018 is when that all happened. And yeah, we've been off to the races ever since.
I'm just gonna take a note real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and the other thing I'll mention is like we've been able to launch a podcast that has reached people around the world. We've served thousands of clients,
it's
grown a lot
awesome.
on social, on Instagram. We've been able to really gain traction on a very taboo subject, and it's been
Yeah.
cool to just see God kind of spread this message. And I think God is, Jesus is coming back for a holy bride, like a spotless
Yeah.
one. And I feel like I get to play a role in that in helping hopefully thousands and one day maybe millions of men quit pornography and walk in greater holiness and righteousness. So that's what it's all about
Nah,
for me.
dude. I mean, the work that you're doing is honestly, it's really incredible. And seeing guys get well and overcoming this massive issue is so important. It's funny. My journey into pornography started pretty young as well, as most men. I think the average age for guys right now is like anywhere from 8 to 11 years old. Men are introduced to pornographic images, and which is getting younger and younger, sadly.
Yeah.
But when I was, growing up, I was born in 1980. And so, we didn't have the internet. You had to like try hard, you had to find somebody's magazines or usually like somebody's dad had magazines or older brother stole them from a store. And that's kind of how I got started looking at porn. I remember
Yeah.
one time I tried to watch pornography on, like when I was probably like, just thinking, it's probably like 1994 or something, 14. And the internet was so slow. Do you remember dial up? Like it, like for people nowadays, kids nowadays, they don't understand like dial up. It took a long time to load a page. And so,
Oh
and then
yeah.
you could actually hear it calling, dong, dong,
Yeah.
dong. It's doing the
And then
whole
if somebody made a
sequence.
phone call while you were doing that, then you cut it off and you had to
Yeah, it
start
would
all
have
over
worked.
again.
And so my
Yeah.
friend and I were trying to look at porn. And it was taking so long. We were terrified that his dad was going to come in the room. So we just shut it down, which honestly was a saving grace because I was so
Yes.
addicted already just to the static images and even just, VHS tapes. That's really what a bunch of stolen VHS tapes that we got
Yep.
into. But man, if I would have had the internet back then, it would have, I don't know honestly, I don't know where my life would be today. It would have been, so much harder than back in the days when VHS tapes and stuff like that because you couldn't carry it around with you all day, right? Like
Yeah.
you had to be really whatever intentional to look at it. And so man, nowadays what guys are experiencing in is just it really is it's like it is the real pandemic. If we're talking about pandemics, is the amount of men that and women, but we're talking to men today, the amount of men that are struggling with pornography and sexual addiction. It's just crazy. And the challenge with sexual addiction is with any addiction, really, but the challenge with sexual addiction is it takes over your whole entire life. It becomes your whole entire life and disqualifies you from so many things.
Yeah.
And just is this massive burden and weight that holds so many men back. And so, man, I don't know if there's a more important subject that we can talk about today, and help
Yeah.
guys get free from.
Well, it's a good point because they say porn is like the three A's. It's affordable, accessible, and anonymous.
Uh,
And those are all the byproducts primarily of technology and
yeah,
smartphones in particular. And you're right, like it's no longer the CD room in the back of a Blockbuster or something like that. Like
yeah,
the barrier to entry is just non-existent. At the time of this recording, beginning of 2024, there's states now that are coming up with age verification laws where you actually have to present like proof that you're 18 years old to access.
yeah,
There's some things going in the right direction, but there's so much work to be done. And to your point, like you're saying, like I don't know where my life would be if I got exposed now, where I could access it that way. But we're seeing what's happening. Like we're seeing that erectile dysfunction's on the rise in young people.
yeah,
There's actually a study that came out in 2021. I left this out of my story earlier, but I wound up doing research at the university for about 3 years. And so research is a huge part of it. It
mhm,
informs a lot of the work we do. And there's a study that came out in 2021 showing that actually viewing pornography and masturbating, if you do those two behaviors together, and there's a couple other criteria, it can actually cause infertility
wow,
in men. And so there's an infertility crisis in our day and age, and pornography is not solely responsible, but it plays a role. And yeah, I mean, divorce rates increase. Obviously, people's satisfaction in life plummets, productivity, all that stuff. And so, yeah, people's lives are literally being ruined by this stuff, and they didn't know any better. Everybody was doing
yeah,
it, watching in the locker room, and they got
yeah.
exposed at a young age and whatever. And then, you see it probably in your office all the time, Jay. People hit their 20s, 30s, 40s, and their life's in shambles because of things like pornography.
Well, I think the one of the big challenges, and I'm going to throw this back to you, but one of the biggest big challenges is it feels so normal when you're in high school and even grade school, high school. It just feels like what everyone's doing. Like it's just part of being a man. It's like that book, Every Man's Battle. I'm not dogging the guy who wrote it, but I don't know. I just kind of hate that title.
Yeah.
And but it really does. It feels so excusable because it's so accessible and so used, right? And there's no stigma around. There's no even positive peer pressure. Very very small amount of positive peer pressure in our society today around consuming pornography. And so I think it really is a massive trap for a lot of men who start young and I'd love for you to talk through a little bit about why do you think that this is so rampant in our society today? And then we're going to go pretty detailed into like what guys need to do to buckle down and really get well.
Yeah, I think we are the most disconnected generation of all time. And I think that probably fuels more of our porn consumption and sexual
Mm,
misbehavior than just about anything else. We sort of describe porn as fast food intimacy. It temporarily satisfies cravings, but it ultimately leaves you hungrier. And there's always a deeper reason that people are watching, connection, control, a sense of affirmation, a sense of feeling good enough, no
yeah,
risk of rejection. The list goes on and on.
yeah,
And I think it's been our inability, in particular as men, to not only cope with these issues, but actually come up with healthy ways to resolve them altogether or certainly manage them. That leads us to something like pornography. Most people's first exposure story is it's relatively innocent. It's relatively
yep,
I was just kind of curious and I checked it out. And maybe as it evolves, it's like, yeah, I just kind of got an urge and I went to check it. But as time goes on, it starts to meet those deeper, fundamental underlying needs. And I think that is actually what not only makes it so prevalent, the three A's are really what make it so prevalent initially, but what makes all these repeat customers in our society is the fact that pornography is temporarily satisfying a deeper underlying need. And so the solution becomes really obvious once you agree to that. Then you have to figure out what that need is and find a better way to get it met. And obviously that's a little bit oversimplified, but that's the basic premise. But I think most men in our society, and even in the church, are not always willing to broach those subjects. I think most people, you and I are in charismatic environments. Charismatic environments, people want the deliverance prayer, they want the
Yeah.
quick fix, they want no mess whatsoever. And there's a value for that. And we know tons
Yeah.
of guys who have got set free that way. But there is something to be said about a process, a journey. There's a maturity that comes with it. And I think most people aren't willing to pay the price for that maturity that could actually allow them to manage their inner life well enough that pornography is no longer a viable option.
Yeah. I think that's really well put. One of the biggest challenges that I think a lot of men face is they don't understand when they don't understand when the addiction actually starts. And I know I talk about this a lot when we're talking about addiction. And this isn't my definition, but they say addiction starts when you can no longer bear being present in your life, right? Like that's the
Mm,
moment when we start using. And for most men, for most human beings, let's just talk about people. When people start to want to check out, in our society today, that's happening so young that you're not even aware that you're wanting to check out, right? Like, I
yeah.
think when we talk about, because I was thinking about like, why are we so disconnected, and where does that disconnection happen? And most people are so confused because we don't choose to be born, we don't choose the family that we're born into, and we don't choose the race, and we don't choose how we're treated, and so you really do. You get born into this world that you're really completely powerless to, and yet you're so dependent upon that environment to take care of you and nurture you and create peace for you. And then as we start to talk about where you learn to regulate your emotions, that's all supposed to happen through co-regulation with parents, right? And the people that you're caretakers, and that's like your baseline for learning how to get back to peace and not live in anxiety. And so many guys grew up in a home that was chaotic, that was disconnected. And I think a lot of parents didn't intend for that to happen. But, in our society today, almost all people have to have two parents working in order to afford to live. And or, with the divorce rate being nearly 50%, um, and the fatherlessness being 50% of kids grow up in a home without a dad, actually
Right.
in the home. There's already like people are being born into this pain induced environment, and they're not aware of it, right? You're not aware that your needs are going unmet. You're not aware that the chaos isn't normal. You're not even aware of how much chaos you're in because you're not super conscious that you're even alive. You're so young. And so
Yeah.
I think to really help men understand, like a lot of guys are forming addictive behaviors before they're even aware that they're learning
Yes.
coping mechanisms.
Yeah. And it goes a step further than that. So if you look at the kind of the neurobiological basis of all addiction, whether it's, alcohol, gambling, video games, drugs, pornography, they're not actually addicted to the behavior or the substance. They're addicted to what's next. That's like the fundamental basis of it. So think about like when you have your
It's
phone
good.
open, you got Instagram open and you're scrolling through your feed. What happens when you get to the bottom? You swipe it up and you wait for that little spinny wheel to kind of spin a bit, and then you get a whole nother, set of posts.
Yeah.
It's what's next. When you go through the stories on Instagram, right? You keep clicking right, click right. What's next? What's next? What's next? So if somebody gets a phone when they're 8 years old, maybe they don't have Instagram. I don't know. It depends, I guess, on the family. But whatever the app is, like what I just laid out is in every app now. It's always what's next, what's next. And you're right. That's preconditioning us to be hooked on the dopamine hits, the what's next,
Yeah.
the anticipation. But the secondary component of it is it stops us from being present. I love what you said earlier, and that is the ultimate antidote to addiction. It is being present, being in the moment, and that's where you're going to form the most meaningful connection. But yeah, we have our work cut out for us, because most things in society are always about the next thing, the micro things like going through an app, and the larger things in life as well.
Yeah. One of the big challenges I think that a lot of guys are facing is, well, there's just so much, but in order to really get well, you have to be willing to share your story, right? And you have to be willing to open up and to reach out. And if you've never done that, or if you have done that and it hasn't gone well, then you really get stuck in this groove of like, man, I there's so much rejection from intimacy. There's so much rejection from vulnerability. I think that's one of the big things that I see happening a lot. I mean, like my wife and I are doing a marriage intensive right now, just to give you an example. And we have a bunch of couples signed up. And one of the couples emailed me and just they just said, "Hey, we thought this was, there's only going to be 6 people in the group, which is fine. But we have a very hard time sharing our story and and meeting with other couples, and I just don't feel comfortable with a big group." And then later on, he messaged me and said, "Hey, um, I've had a couple affairs on my wife, and I'm in recovery." And
Hmm.
my whole thought process was, you're going back to the core of your problem, right? Like the actual thing that you want the most, the thing that you crave the most is to be unconditionally known and unconditionally accepted. What you keep doing is hiding yourself and hiding your story. And Brene Brown has in her talk, The Power of Vulnerability, she gives like 4 steps to connection. And the first step that she talks about is um, courage. And then she gives a
Right.
definition for it. She says, the first step in connection is courage. Courage is the ability to share your story with your whole heart, being willing to bear your imperfections. So again,
Mm.
courage, she says, courage in a relationship is the ability to share your story with your whole heart, being willing to bear your imperfections.
Wow.
And when you think of it, because so many people think I just have to be vulnerable to in relationship to have a good relationship. It's like, well, you have to be willing to have courage. Like there is no real deep connection without you actually being willing to share your story, the good, the bad, the ugly, with everything inside of you. And you and I both know, like, if you can get a guy to do that, right? Like, if you can get him to open up and to bare his soul, the good, the bad, the ugly. And the key to me is, and not shame himself. This is
Right.
who I am. This is my story. This is my past. This is my present. This is really where I'm at.
Yep.
That to me is the beginning of a transformation, because the opposite is how most men are living is I'm I'm isolated, I'm lonely, I'm hiding. Even the guys that I am with don't really know what I'm going through.
Yeah.
I'm there's so much protection, there's so much armor on. And getting men to a place where they're willing and able to open up and share their story, to me, is one of the biggest keys in them starting to walk free. Like, can you share a little bit more? What are you seeing in men when guys start your program? Like, what is your kind of first step for them?
Yeah, great question. I really do agree with what you're saying too. I think that story piece is important. And one question we get asked on our podcast a lot is like, I don't have anyone to talk to. So what am I supposed to do? Like, you guys say it's so important to share your story, but the question we always ask back is, who is the safest person in your life? Just let's
Mhm.
put all the other details aside. Who's the safest person you can talk to? That's the person you should go tell about what's going on. Like set yourself up for success, right? Or stack the odds in your favor.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people feel like they have to tell their spouse right away, or they have to go talk to their pastor. But those avenues, again, those avenues are all great. That might be the person who comes to mind as who's the safest. But there's lots of ways to go about it. We have a 3-pillar process. So when people do come to us, we see people who are having affairs. buying sex. We see people who have been in addictions for, multiple decades. Pastors and athletes. We're working with a couple people that are professional athletes right now. Um, everyone goes through more or less the exact same process with us.
Mhm.
And the three pillars are building self-awareness, transformation of the heart, and shifting your identity. And when these three pillars are kind of wrapped up in community, some expert guidance, and like I said, we really try to infuse scripture and science into the work we're doing. That's what we found has been the most impactful and the most likely for people to be free long term. Because I think that was always my knock on this kind of industry is you can show that people are free for 60 days, 90 days, maybe even, I don't know, 120 days. But then what happens to them like a year later, two years later?
Mhm.
You and I know like that's where the secret sauce really is if you can get somebody long term, that's when their marriage starts to heal. That's when they become better fathers. That's when
Yeah.
their careers start to take off. And so, those three pillars are really what we found is the foundation for getting to the root issues and really affecting long-term change in somebody's life.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think maybe just diving into a couple of those, like into self-awareness. Why do you feel like that's the one of your pillars?
So we have like kind of a proverb for each of these, and
Oh,
the
cool.
proverb for it's they're not actually from the book of Proverbs, but they're just like these sayings that
Yeah,
kind
it's
of bring
cool.
it all together. Just to clarify, but the proverb for this first pillar is, "If you are not aware, it cannot be repaired."
Mm.
And so the one mistake that a lot of guys make, and this is true in action, like guys are notorious for this because we're so action oriented, and I'm speaking to myself when I say this, is we are so excited to solve a problem that we don't actually define it clearly enough, and as a result, we don't come up with an effective solution.
Mm.
And so the premise of cultivating self-awareness is that you have enough of an understanding of the brokenness, the dysfunction within your life that you're actually able to say, yeah, you know what? I actually turn to pornography when I'm really stressed, or I turn to pornography when I feel alone. I'm a popular guy or I have lots of friends, but it's when I feel alone, I feel lonely more than people would realize. That's when I turn to pornography. The more clearly you can articulate your inner life and how it's playing into your behavior, the more likely you are to come up with an effective solution. So that self-awareness piece is huge. And I've heard some of your story, Jay. I know for a fact, like, um, you grew up in a day and age where like this was not talked about. Emotions
Yeah,
and men, those are two polar ends of the
it's true.
spectrum. And same for me, and I think between being pastors' kids, I grew up in Indian culture where you don't talk about emotions. That's a sign of weakness. Everything was stacked against those kinds of things. But the reality is if you had a logical problem, like if porn was really a logical issue, then your logical solutions would have solved it already. Your
Yeah.
internet filter or whatever else. Like this is clearly an emotional problem. And so being able to understand that inner life, that's where everything has to start. Otherwise, you're hopeless in designing an actual solution that's going to be effective.
Yeah, it's so key. I love that and just your proverb and the whole thing. Like it's so key because you can't solve a problem that you can't see and that you don't fully understand. I that's the problem to me when people come to the prayer line, is I get this a lot. Just being a pastor, especially in the world that we live in, where we are open and honest. Oh, I'm sharing my story. I'm sharing how I get out of pornography, all that stuff.
Yep.
After I preach, lots of guys will come up and say, "Man, I'm stuck in pornography. Can you pray for me?" My answer is almost always the same. I will pray for you, but a lack of prayer isn't the root issue for pornography.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
and I'm not like trying to beat them up but here's the big challenge is if you don't actually understand what got you here, even if you don't use pornography, you'll use something else to solve your loneliness, to solve your anxiety, to solve your
Yes.
whatever depression issue. You have you have an addiction, and that the root cause of an addiction is not the fact that the root cause of overeating is not that you're hungry.
Yeah,
It,
right.
you know, it- and so helping men to really understand the cycle. How did I get here? Why am I using it? And what I found too in working with guys is really incredible is most people don't know why they are the way that they are. They haven't actually stopped and even taken a account of what happened in my life. How was I
Mm,
treated? How did I feel growing up? Who am I connected to? Like, what are my
yeah.
highs and my lows? What is my story? And if you don't really understand that, then you don't understand you, because your whole entire life is just one big math equation. Like, why you are the way that you are is almost a math equation. You can almost sit down literally and go, this happened in my life, this happened, this happened, this happened. It's why I think the way that I think. It's why I believe what I believe about myself. It's why I eat how I eat. Like, you didn't design your food palette. That was all designed for you. It's what you were
Yeah.
fed. If you grew up in Asia, you would like different food than you grew up in, the Western culture, United States.
Yep.
We have different desires for food and quantities of food, and that is literally because of how you were raised. It's just a big math equation. You give somebody this X amount for X amount of time, and they
Yeah.
develop and acquire tastes, and well, that can happen. And so I love when you start talking about self-awareness. I love it because a lot of people in the church dog on self-awareness because they think it's introspection, and
Mm,
they
yeah.
they get into like, I don't want to just be thinking about the negative, right? Church is the In church you get taught to think about the positive, which
Yeah.
is helpful and awesome. And we know Philippians 4 says, think on these things that are lovely, pure, holy, and praiseworthy. But it's not saying discount the things that are going bad. it
Mm,
it's And so self-awareness is awesome because it gives you the ability to know what's going on inside of you whenever you need to. It's that piece that it's the ability to check in. It's the man, I feel a little bit off. Oh, I haven't drank water today. Well, you probably should. And you're going to have a
yeah.
breakdown if you don't understand, or man, I'm not doing well today. What's happening? Oh, I feel really lonely. I feel like that tool is a muscle that has to get built. And if guys are out there going, okay, I believe you, like, I need to grow in self awareness, because I think I really do. I think understanding your story and how you interact inside of that, like,
Yes.
w- what has been what's been the overall theme in your life? How do you feel about yourself? Are you medicating with anything? When do you start? And what has worked to help you get out of it? And what's your cycle? Like, understanding that, just simply mapping it out. And you can do
Yep.
some reflections to do that. To me is the first start. But I think one practical tool, like, that has really helped me years ago, I don't even know how long ago. I would probably just say like 15 years ago, when I really started to go down this road in helping people understand it. I started to set alarms on my phone, and
Mm,
when I'd wake up in the morning, I do three a day. In the morning, my alarm would go off because we always have our phones with us, right? So you might as well use it. And in the morning, it
yep.
would say, "Good morning. Um, what do you need?" And so sometimes you wake up in the morning, you don't realize it. Like, your brain doesn't stop working. It's not like you go to sleep and your whole body shuts down. Your brain's still working. You're just unconscious.
Mm,
You're not aware of it. And so oftentimes you wake up in the morning in a different mood than you went to bed in. And sometimes that can even be a worse mood. Like, wow, I feel worried about X thing. And it just gives you the opportunity to wake up in the morning and go, oh, I've got this on my mind, this on my mind, this on my mind, whatever. I feel lonely. I feel tired. I feel hungry. I feel, insecure. I've got a big meeting that I'm going to, and I don't feel prepared for it. At lunch, the alarm goes off and it says, how's it going? It gives you the option to be present with what's really going on right now. Is there anything that
yes.
you're not addressing? Is there anything? And then at night, I just have one that said, "How did it go?" And it gives you the opportunity to reflect back or share a need with your wife, or check in with yourself. And it's the ability, like, taking time to build these small, little, tiny habits is the difference. Is literally the difference between building an ecosystem that sustains you, not just using your willpower, not just changing a few things in your environment, but building an ecosystem so that you can stay free 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, because you
Yeah.
have to build these new operating systems, like a complete new operating system that you now function out of, because otherwise you end up relapsing, right? You end up
Yep.
back in the old place. Because the other thing that I think is really true, like, when you're going through a program with a lot of guys, it's still an artificial environment.
Mm,
You don't realize it, but you're drafting off the momentum of everyone else, which is
yeah.
awesome. That's to me, that's grace. It's like you put yourself in a place where other people are stronger than you. They're plowing forward. They're moving ahead. But when you get out of that environment, if you didn't set up these systems and ultimately build this brand new ecosystem, then you end up fading out, over time, and you end up back in the same cycle, and you can only stay free. I see that a lot
Mm,
where people can only stay free when they're in the purity groups and when they have their um you know apps on the phone that don't let them look at stuff. And but to me, that's still a prison. It's
yeah.
it's better than, I'm not shaming anybody, I'm just trying to say, like, ultimate freedom happens to me when you rebuild a new ecosystem. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really well said. The language we use is it's actually about skill development.
Okay,
And
cool.
I think the reason that people want the prayer, versus the skill development is because the prayer's quicker, it's cheaper,
Yeah.
it's whatever, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But we have lots of stories, and we even have clients who have had bouts of freedom where somebody did pray for them and they got set free and they were good to go. And if their life probably never changed and stayed exactly the same, they would have stayed free forever. But a stressor came up, they got triggered, whatever. And because there was no skill development, there was no maturity, they wind up relapsing. And then you start to question, like, oh, did God really set me free? And blah, 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 blah. When I think what actually happens is people just don't have the maturity to sustain those kinds of breakthroughs.
Hmm.
And so I think what you're saying is really important. I like the language ecosystem. That's like your skills starting to become habits, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly it. And it's funny what you mentioned with your phone. I did something very similar. I should have used my phone to remind myself, but I just had a friend who would check in with me every day and say, "Hey, what are you feeling?" And if people are hearing that idea and maybe that's like a little bit too scary, another great way to do this is just to journal, and you can just prompt yourself like, "What am I feeling? How am I doing?" That's actually what we typically teach all of our clients is to journal. We have a little bit of a novel approach,
Yeah.
but those are really powerful tools to kind of open up the doors. And what they actually do, what people don't realize is when you build self-awareness and you understand your inner life, you're actually regaining control of the situation
Hmm.
because it's a really helpless place to be when you don't know what's actually causing the problem. But when
It's
you
true.
can start to pinpoint emotions and you can start to realize like, oh, I actually feel sad today and that's what's going on. Suddenly, you've been able to kind of deflate the situation. It's not like scary and urgent, but you've also just taken control of it. And now you can say, yeah, I feel sad. What am I going to do about it? And find a healthier option than pornography or whatever your vice might be. So, yeah, it's pivotal. And I think building that ecosystem like you're talking about, that's everything. It's everything in the conversation of longevity. If you just want to be free a couple months, then don't
Yeah.
bother, but
Yeah.
I think if you're in the long-term game, that's going to be necessary.
Sathya, what are you seeing is the biggest challenge that men actually face? Like, what's the biggest cause of setback? What's the biggest thing that guys are like, it's keeping them from breakthrough when they're on the path? Like when they've
Yeah.
actually jumped in, they're on the path.
Well, I'll tell you what guys say is the biggest problem, and then I'll tell you what the actual biggest problem is.
Come on,
So,
that's awesome.
what most guys say that the biggest problem is consistency. They say, I have a hard time staying consistent. But we know for a fact that they don't have a consistency issue because if they did, they would never have an addiction in the first place,
Yeah. They're
right?
super
Like,
consistent. Yeah.
they're the most consistent. They're just consistent with the wrong things.
Yeah.
So that's what most guys are going to tell you. I think what happens along the way, because most people listening will have varying degrees of freedom. Maybe one guy listening is struggling every day. Some guys are probably struggling weekly, and I'm sure there's guys who are struggling less frequently than that. But the biggest problem guys run into is a lack of clarity. And when men do not have clarity, they make
Mm.
poor decisions.
Mm.
So I think the biggest key, and this is why people should be listening to your podcast, they should be getting coaching or joining the communities or participating in what you guys are doing. Because when you're surrounded by people who have been there, or you have an expert, you have a coach or a guide who's been there, the biggest gift they give you is not the tools and the resources and
Oh.
the listening ear. It's all helpful. But what they actually provide for you more than anything else, if they're really worth their salt, is clarity. And when you have clarity, then you know what your next move is. The one thing I always say when guys jump onto a call, when we do our group calls, we offer one-on-one and group. It's kind of part and parcel. But on the group calls, the one thing we always tell guys is you don't need to know the 35 steps to get free. You just need to know your next step. That's the most important thing. And if you're part of a system where, the steps are already laid out for you and calculated, that's even better, because then all you have to do is just get clarity on that next step. And I think that's where guys falter, is they reach a ceiling because they have enough of a piecemeal solution that gets them to a plateau, and then they just lack clarity on their next step. And so they think, well, I just need to be more consistent. Like I said before, they think, oh, I just need to do this a little bit more intensely. Or,
Yeah.
we try to kind of tweak the same thing that actually just has simply plateaued. Because ultimately what we lack is clarity on what the next step is to keep taking us to the next level until we're actually walking in full freedom.
Yeah. I think even adding something to that, like what we don't realize is that when we are aimless, that it's actually very hopeless. It's a very hopeless feeling. And kind of the worst thing that you can do for someone is get them a tiny bit of help, and then for that help to fail eventually, because it leads to hopelessness, right? Like if people start counseling, so I've done this a lot where I've counseled just, I don't know, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It's the main thing that I do. Well, it's the main thing I did for probably like 17 years. And then now I lead the counseling departments and stuff. But the hardest clients were always the ones that went to counseling for years, but they didn't actually get really good care. And
Yeah.
so they didn't get a real good plan. They weren't held to that plan. They didn't understand the plan. They didn't understand the next step of that plan and taking ownership of that plan and what their role was in that plan, right? And
Yep.
so that client was always the worst because they inevitably are starting out hopeless. What I've tried doesn't work. Even my best effort, right? I put my
Right.
best effort. I want this so bad. And people really do. Like, people are desperate, man. They'll do anything. If you
Yeah.
tell them, they'll do anything to get well. But as soon as you get to hopelessness, you almost lose all the ability to move forward. And it really is that study that was done with the rats, where they put them, I don't know, I'm sure that you know this story, right? They
Yeah.
put
Rat
these
Park.
no, not the rat park
No.
experiment. No,
Okay.
which is a cool study. But the rats with hope. Have you heard about this study?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, this is going to be a gift to you for what you do.
Let's
Yeah, this
go.
is awesome. Yeah. And so there was a guy who basically he was studying to see how long like rats could swim and survive. And so he took this circulating bucket of water and he put a rat in it. And basically the rats would swim for a very short amount of time. That's minutes, like 6, 7, 8 minutes in the circulating bucket of water. And they would end up down at the bottom of the bucket of water and swim for a little bit before they would die. So that was happening over and over and over again. Well, what he decided to do is he would save the rats. So he decided to start saving the rats right before they would drown. He'd reach in, pull them out, give them rest and food and like kind of resuscitate them, right? And they put them back in that water, that bucket of circulating water. You can like go on Google and read the whole thing. Um, it's crazy because the rats that could only swim for 6, 7, 8 minutes, 15 minutes before dying, now that rat would swim for 60 hours, 40, 50,
Jeez.
60 hours. For days they could swim. And this whole conclusion is that the rats were energized by hope. And we're no different than that. If you have hope, you can walk across broken glass barefoot. If you
Yeah.
have hope, you will scale mountains. I mean, think about it. Like it, hope is what led people from independent Missouri all the way across the country through the Rocky Mountains, fording rivers in wagons. Like that's the Oregon Trail. That's what got pioneers from Missouri all the way to California and to Oregon, where they're seeing people dying. They were starving. There is the hope, right, of this new
Yeah.
beginning. I'm going to go to Oregon. I'm going to find gold. There's free land there. There's all kinds of, animals to hunt. Like this idea that somehow, some way, I'm escaping this past life, my dad, I'm escaping the, maybe family that I hate or relationships that suck, and I'm going to go somewhere else. It's hope.
Yep.
But as
Yep.
soon as you get into a place where you don't have hope, you don't look for new opportunities, you don't dream, you don't try, and it's a very dark world. And so I think you're onto it, man. When you say if you don't actually have clarity in your life, well, you have the opposite of that, which is aimlessness. And aimlessness leads to hopelessness. It breeds hopelessness. You just feel like even my best efforts, even when I try the most, even if I gave it my all, it wouldn't matter. And that phrase right there, it wouldn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm stuck. That's when to me, guys, listen, I'm not even ending this, but I'm saying this. If you're at a spot where you're saying phrases like that, you need to stop and reach out for help.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
clear sign that what you're doing, if you could have solved this problem on your own, you'd already solved it.
Yeah.
And you can
Yeah.
only stay in hopelessness for so long before you either want to eject out of this life, uh, or you're going to find a solution that doesn't really solve your problem well. You're going to medicate somehow.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we run into in our society today is sort of this we're a little bit overfilled with knowledge and
Yeah,
because you can get all the information you need anywhere, Chat GPT, YouTube, whatever you want,
it's
this
true.
podcast, obviously great resources. And I think we've been lied to because people tell you that knowledge is power,
Mm,
but I think that knowledge is actually potential. It's knowledge
mm,
with
that's great.
action where real power comes from. And I think to your point, when people are hopeless, one of the effects of it is that they become inactive, right? Hopeless people don't take action. And I think anything you can do to get yourself taking action, even if it ends up being the wrong action,
Yeah.
I would rather that than you be inactive and hopeless or calculating the perfect action to take, but never actually taking it, which I think a lot of people fall to in this area because it's so taboo, right? It feels scary to step out and to take any kind of action. So I think it's a really good point, and I think that's when men really feel powerful is when they're actually taking those steps and doing something to move forward. And without that, it's really really hard to make that progress.
Okay, the guys that really crush it, what do you see as the common denominator for them? What's the greatest key
Man,
to success?
okay, great question. And this is actually a good antidote to the hopelessness thing. Because I discovered this in my own journey, which is that when I started to hear other stories of people recovering, it just reminded me that it was possible. Like that was the equivalent of the experimenter pulling me out of the bucket just so that I could get a little taste of freedom. So I really appreciate that question. And hopefully I can impart that to the listeners a little bit. I would say all the guys that we've seen that are successful long term, they have three things in common. The first is they're intentional. The two is that they're realistic about their timelines,
Mm,
and the third is that they build meaningful connection, whether it's within the community, with the coach, whoever it is that they're working with. Those are all intangibles. Like we can't measure intentionality necessarily, but I'm thinking of one client who every Friday morning was like his deep clean days. And so he just carved out time. He put his phone on do not disturb or airplane mode or whatever, and he's just locked in and he showed up to the call. Like there was just intentionality about it. Um, all three of those things go a really long way. And the realistic expectations again is actually part of that hope conversation because I think a lot of people feel like it should happen very quickly, and
yeah.
when it doesn't they start to lose hope, like something's wrong with me, this isn't working. And most guys that we've worked with, it's like actually this takes a little bit of time. Like we had one client, his first month with us, he had 23 relapses. And you're like, man, this program's a sham. Like, what a waste of time, right? And then the second month, he had 18 relapses. So
Yeah,
again, if
you're
we're
like, come
street
on.
counting, yeah, exactly. If we were street counting, his numbers suck. But if we're looking at the trends and we're trying to play a long game, the trend is going in the right direction. The third month, he had 8 relapses. The fourth month, he had six. And by the time he had 6 months, he was completely clean. And that's been over a year and a half now. He hasn't looked back.
Man.
So if you have realistic expectations about this, things can actually still change pretty quickly. But sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot because we're overly optimistic and we're a little bit over ambitious. And then when things don't go the way they should, we sort of crumble and we just kind of self sabotage and assume nothing's working. So that one's really big as well. And then obviously the relationship, the community part of it. There is no recovery without
Yeah.
community. We know that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. I'm sure you guys have heard all these adages.
Yep.
They're true. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It's not quantity, it's quality. And so even just one meaningful friendship can go a long way for somebody's recovery. So I would say those three things are probably the most profound, most prevalent.
Dude, I love that. Um, it's so cool because no matter where guys are at, how far in, the path that they've taken, like we see guys get free and stay free and live completely new lives like over and over and over again. And it's true, the in being intentional, taking time to set yourself up well when starting, having realistic goals and expectations. Dude, it's such great advice. Eh, because yeah, I think I'll even myself, like when I start something new, I always have unrealistic goals. It's human nature and it's our Western culture that we live in and whatever. But reading, have you read the book Tiny Habits or Atomic Habits?
I haven't read, I'm getting so much flack from my friends right now because I haven't read
Uh,
Atomic Habits yet. So the answer is no, I haven't read either of those, although I'm sure I would love them.
okay, yeah, just read Tiny Habits, and if you haven't read either of them,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I think Tiny Habits is a bit more practical, uh, and it's awesome. But it kind of goes into the science behind why most people's New Year's resolutions or people's resolutions fail. And
Mm.
one of the main reasons is the entry to barrier is too high. And
Hmm.
and I'll say, I really like the story that you told where a guy, relapsed 23 times and then 18 times. In the church, we look at that and we would go, he's still sinning, right? We completely discount the fact that he's moving forward and he would just
Yes.
be written off as a failure. And,
Yes.
but I just love that if you can love somebody in their mess, right? Like, and have a realistic expectation that if you're a drug addict, you're not just going to stop drugs overnight. Like
Yeah.
if you are a true drug addict, like you're going to get put into a place where they may replace the heroin with something else, but you're
Right.
going to take something else to help you through that. And same with alcoholism, and you actually have to detox, and sex is a lot the same, right? Like, so there is this process, and if you don't discount the day of small beginnings, and getting back to the tiny habits, like he said, most people start out like buying a gym membership because they want to get fit. And it's the wrong thing to do because the barrier to entry is so high. One, you have to
Right.
pay a monthly membership. Two, like most people get up like just at a ridiculous time. So now I'm going to get up at 5:30 in the morning when I'm not even used to waking up at 5:30 in the morning. And then I got to go to this place that's really foreign, right? Like I got to go to the gym that feels very uncomfortable. And then I actually don't even know how to use these machines. And then I'm going to be really sore after I do use the machines because I'm going to go too hard. And then I'm going to wake up tomorrow and do that again. Like the chances that you actually, when you stop and look at it like that, when you really break down what a person has to do in order to go to the gym consistently, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
why most people are paying gym memberships but not going. So he says, like, start with doing one push-up after you go pee. That's it. Like that or something,
Right.
right? Like that's where he
Genius.
started.
Yeah.
So he said, I do one
Yep.
push-up after I go pee every day. And for his gym membership for the gym, he said, like, instead of instead of success being I work out at the gym 3 days a week, your first week is just I bought gym clothes. That's success. And
Mm.
then I put my gym clothes by my bed the night before, right? So the first week, and then you're just waking up at 5:30. You don't even have to go to the gym. You just wake up at 5:30, right? Or whatever time you want to
Yep.
go. And then it's I get dressed in the morning in my gym clothes, but I don't have to go. And when you look at that, you're like, that's so ridiculous. Like that guy has no willpower. He should just go to the gym. But what happens is creating the actual habit and success being this low in entry to low barrier to entry. What happens is you go, I can buy gym clothes. I'll do that on my way home. And you buy gym
Right.
clothes. And you go, I can put my clothes by my bed, and you feel good about it, right? Like if you praise yourself, like I'm doing it. I'm on my way to working out. I'm on my way to physical fitness. And then I wake up at 6:30, but I don't actually have to go to the gym. I just have to get dressed. Like I got dressed. I look at me, like I'm becoming physically fit. I'm on my way to do that. And then, oh, I go to the gym for 20 minutes. I don't go for an hour. Like I got to the gym and I did 20 minutes. And like if you start to, honestly, I think it's so it's it's so hard to do small stuff because it feels like I could be so much further along if you can kick the fear of missing out. Actually, if you can kick your ego out of the room for a little bit
Yeah.
and just go, I'm going to take this thing that I've been stuck in for friggin' 18 years or that I have
Yeah.
never done in my life. And I'm going to break it into small, little, tiny wins. I'm going to
Man, it's
move
so good.
this thing forward. Like, guys, you'll see so much more breakthrough in your life if you do that. Um,
Mm.
and, and I do think I always tell guys the fast track, like if you really want to do the fast track, if guys are like, I have to, like, I can't wait, I have to find the fast track. To me, the only way to do it is to find a guy that's further along than you,
Yep.
that's willing to take you on the journey. And that to me, like joining a group like yours, jumping into a BraveCo group, whatever. There's lots of men's purity groups. We got one
Mm.
at the church that's awesome. If you really want the fastest cheat code to getting well and staying well, it's get with people who are further along than you and who are willing to drag you along the way. That to me that's the cheat code.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it ties everything together. And the one thing I wanted to mention too is that like what you're saying about kind of stacking these tiny habits until they eventually build a bigger habit is you have to, this is where knowing your story is so helpful because
Yeah.
you have to know where you've started, right? Like the person who works at the gym 4 times a week, they can't get away with just saying, I put my clothes on and that was successful today, right? Because their starting point is so
Yeah.
different. Like we
It's
all know
different.
that's a cop out for that person. But for
Yeah.
the person who hasn't been to the gym in 20 years, that's a huge accomplishment.
It is.
And that's where knowing your story is so important. And that's why I think the things that guys typically hear in the church, like which is install the internet filter, get the accountability partner, the willpower, the disciplines, all that stuff is very like generalized. And we start to follow these prototypes and these ideals that are not actually specific to our situation. They're not specific enough. And so the most effective solution will always be unique to the individual, especially when you're talking about something as personal as someone's,
Yeah.
sexual well-being and something, as taboo as porn addiction. So I think it's really well said. And I'll just add a little thing to what you said about the expert.
Yeah. Do it.
DeepClean grew significantly in the last year. We doubled in size and we doubled in size the year before. And the main reason for our growth, and you can see on Instagram as well, we had 5,000 followers a year ago. We're just about to cross 100,000.
Wow.
The only reason we've grown is because I found people who were doing what I was doing in different industries, mind you. And I just said, hey, can you teach me what you're doing? And some of them, it cost a lot of money to do it. But those are like the best investments I've ever made. And that's just a business example. But the same is true in your relationships. It's true in recovery. If you're willing to find those people who will help you, who have been there and done it and can say basically, hey, here's the steps I took. That is by far the fastest way to that meteoric growth. And everybody listening is capable of it. It really is
Yeah.
possible if you have the right people in your corner.
It's true. Sathiya, you're a beast, man. And I so appreciate, yeah, just what you've given your life to in how you've gone after it and your story, of just recover yourself, but also weaponizing your story and giving it away for other guys to use and to just be that testimony that pushes them forward. So, man, thank you so much. Guys, go check out what he's doing. You can find him on Instagram. You can check out his programs. They're legit. They work. And it's just, yeah, it's awesome. So I'd encourage you guys to do that. Sathiya, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, man. It's been a pleasure. And for people who are listening who are into podcasts, our podcast is called Unleash the Man Within, and they can go check that out as well.
Awesome. BraveCo men, go do something brave this week. Take a look at your life. If it needs adjusting, get after it, right? Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Don't wait for someone else to come in and take over and make a change. That's not going to happen. But this week you can make a difference in your life. If you need to grow in your marriage, if you need to break an addiction, if you don't have any friends, take some action this week that betters your life. We will see you next week on the BraveCo podcast. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to the BraveCo podcast. If you like this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, leave us a great comment. And if you like this episode in particular, share it with your friends and family. That helps us to spread the word. Guys, stay brave. We'll see you next week.